It's so great to be here today. So I've interviewed many people in my lifetime, but today is a first. It's my very first superhero. Lauren Ridloff starred in the Marvel movie, The Eternals, in 2021, and has been a regular character on television's iconic series, The Walking Dead, since 2018. She's a Tony-nominated Broadway performer, an activist for the deaf community, a mother, wife, marathon runner, and teacher. She's joining us today from Austin, Texas, together with her ASL interpreter, Ramon Norad. I'm so excited to have Lauren as our guest, and thank you, Ramon, for being here with us. So let's get started. I have a lot of questions. So, Lauren.
Let's do it.
Okay. Lauren, you first became known as an actress for your performance in the 2018 revival of Children of a Lesser God, for which you won a Tony nomination. But how you got that role and became an actress for the first time at age 40 is a pretty amazing story. Could you tell us how you got your start in show business?
Well, I like how you said how I actually won that nomination. That's how it felt. Truly, I won when I got that nomination. Yes, I mean, it's a wild story, truly. As you mentioned earlier, I was a teacher. I taught kindergarten and first grade for almost about 10 years. And at that time, I was ready to start a new family. So I decided to leave teaching temporarily so I could focus on raising my two sons. And after my second child, I was getting a little, antsy. I was ready to get out of the house for short spurts of time, and just remember who I was as a person. And an acquaintance that I knew, a friend of a friend, reached out to me and asked me if I would be interested in tutoring, somebody one-on-one, a high-profile Broadway director. And they were very hush-hush about who it was and what it was for, just mentioned that they wanted to know if I was available and was willing to meet with this particular director. And I thought it was a great opportunity to get out of the house. I did not expect this ride, I have to tell you. From that very first session that I had with the director, he turned out to be Kenny Leon. And we sat down at a coffee house in Brooklyn. And it was devotion. And it was from there moving forward that we really just connected. I started to meet with him once a week. The first, was just to teach him sign language, but then it became more about just having conversations about life as a deaf person. And Kenny is very interested in finding the authenticity in a role, and specifically of Sarah Norman. And which was really interesting how a deaf woman actually lived in current day society compared to back in the 70s, when the story actually took place. And then after about a year, he got very busy and he disappeared. He was working on several different TV projects, another show. And at that point, I thought we were pretty much done. It was a great experience. And then out of the blue, he reached out to me again and said, okay, so I'm ready to get this show on the road. I want to proceed with casting. Would you help us out, in finding some deaf talent out there? And I never, again, I want to emphasize this, I never once thought that he was even considering me for that role. Not once. It wasn't even something I thought about, because I didn't really fit the profile of who Sarah Norman was. Thus far, traditionally, Sarah has been played by a young white woman, probably in their early 20s, maybe late teens. And I was almost 40 years old, Black Mexican mom, living in Brooklyn. So I definitely did not match that aesthetic. So I had a meeting with the casting director, and we just talked about, different processes for casting. And I didn't realize at that time they were actually trying to size me up, but they did ask me to do the table read. And they were, basically just as a placeholder to keep the seat warm for the right actor. And I thought, sure, so I did the table read with Joshua Jackson. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Let me back up a little bit more. So the big thing with this table read was, I hadn't used my voice in years. I made a conscious decision to turn off my voice when I was 13. And from the time that my parents found out that I was deaf through the age of 13, I had speech therapy and I used sign language to communicate with my family. So they wanted to just, all the different possibility modes of communication. They wanted to make sure that I could. So I did speak. It wasn't natural for me. It was not easy for me. I did not feel free when I used my voice, in how I could express myself, I should say. I had to choose words specifically that I could say clearly rather than just choosing words that I truly wanted to say. So at the age of 13, after I went to go camp and socialize with other deaf campers and deaf adults as counselors, it was there that I realized that this is truly who I am. I felt that I could express myself best using sign language. So at that time, I decided I'm just going to turn off my voice. I felt like I kind of came out to my family at that time as, a capital D deaf person, a person who doesn't use her voice, just uses sign language. So from that time of 13 up until that day, I didn't use my voice. So now we're children of a lesser God, and there is this pivotal moment, this pivotal scene in the play. I'm sorry, everybody, if you might already be aware, but it's where, spoiler alert, where Sarah, as myself, refuses to use her voice like I did. Finally, in this scene, she breaks down and she screams and she uses her voice. And I realized, I was like, wait, at this table read, I'm expected to actually use my voice, something that I hadn't used in over 20, 25 years. And so I was terrified. And I thought, this story, is it worth it? Do I want this story to be back on the stage on Broadway? And I thought it was important. So I did it. I used my voice for the very first time in 25 years. And I think that is what got me on Broadway. And, just not using my voice per se, but actually the strength it took for me to turn my voice back on. So hats off to Broadway actors, I have to say, now that I've experienced it, acting is so courageous and you give it your all, truly. So it's just brave. And I think that's how I actually got to Broadway.
Well, it's an incredible story because then really, when you say this, it sounds like a movie. It doesn't sound like an actual person's life, because then you went on to star in The Walking Dead and in The Eternals with Angelina Jolie. And, even though you could easily pass for your 20s, you were in your 40s. And it's just a remarkable shift to go from this life to this other life. And you had two little kids. What was that? Just like, how did you manage it? Just what was it like to do that? Because all of a sudden you've got to have agents and managers and all of that stuff.
Oh, I have no idea how I did it, honestly. I'm not even sure if I'm doing it truly, to be honest. Somebody said to me once, it's all about finding balance, and balance is not, it's not a noun, it's a verb, truly. And so actually, I just try to balance things. Some days my focus is more on my family, and other days it's more on my work. And it's not always easy, to be honest, truly.
Oh,
I have found that just trying to balance things sometimes is what keeps momentum for me.
yeah. So this notion of balance is so interesting to me because we are virtually at the American Jewish Historical Society. And I saw an interview with you where you talked about your intersectional identity. You had the Mexican father, African-American mother, Russian Jewish husband, you're deaf, and now superhero. So that's a lot of pieces to put together. So could you tell me, when you talk about balance, how do you balance all those identities, not just for you, but for your whole family?
One day at a time, to be honest. I feel like, first of all, the fact that I am deaf means that my deaf community, my deaf people, so to speak, really, I don't know, even, I guess, widen. Yeah, there's a lot of us out there, I will say, but our experiences, our culture is so diverse. And
Mhm.
it's almost as if, Alcoholics Anonymous meeting where you just are thrown into a room where people have no similar backgrounds, but you find that connection. In this case, it is our access to communication that connects all of us in the deaf community. So for me, growing up, my friends, come from all walks of life. Right now I have a friend who is a postman, and I have another friend who is a university professor, and I have friends who are teachers. So it's very diverse. So for me, it's I feel like just being deaf has given me that advantage, that ability to truly become very flexible and fluid in terms of my intersectionalities, of the different cultures, of being able to code switch. And I
Yeah.
feel like that in itself, I could move from one culture community to another quite fluidly. And it just depends on who I'm with at the time.
Wow, that's amazing. I feel like you're a much needed voice at this time of our crazy world when everybody's sort of like this. It's really great to hear about how you achieve balance, because I think the rest of us could learn a lot from that. Your husband, Douglas Ridloff, is a truly fascinating artist himself. In fact, I think I'm going to have him on the podcast later because he's a poet, a performer, and executive director of the American Sign Language Slam, which is riveting. I watched some of his performances online, and if you could just tell us a little bit about what that is exactly. But then, how did you guys meet? Um, and had you had much experience with, and maybe this is inappropriate to ask, but had you had much experience with Jewish men before that?
Hmm. Well, no. Well, I have close friends who was a professor while I was in college, and they were Jewish themselves. And through that, I immersed myself in the whole world of Judaism and decided to convert before I even met my husband. So, really very fortunate that my husband and I met when we did, who happened to be Jewish. It wasn't an intentional, I didn't go out searching for it, for a Jewish man at that time. I was just looking for a great person, honestly. And Douglas is that person. He's a great person, great man, great father, great husband, great friend. Truly, I lucked out, honestly. And Doug was really interesting to me just to see Doug rediscover his Jewish roots. I feel like when I first met him, he was Jewish, by blood, but he wasn't a strong practicing Jew at the time. He kind of fell off to the wayside a bit. He was just going through life. And I feel like that's really something that happens to a lot of us, truly, specifically deaf people, because then again, growing up, we lack that access to a lot of that, to religious services, to programs, to Sunday schools. Those things are just not accessible that actually would push our spiritual growth. And I think that was the case for my husband. I can't really speak for him, obviously. So when you do bring him on your podcast, that's a question for him. However, when I started my conversion, I met with a wonderful rabbi who happened to be deaf as well. And his name was Darby. lie. And wonderful man. We met weekly, took classes to promote those weekly conversations. And I think through those conversations, my husband, slowly finding himself, re-immersing himself into the religion, and, made for a happier situation for both of us because we found a way to reconnect, with his background, with his family, with his history. And it gave me a way to navigate this new wonderful world.
Wow, that is incredible. So what was it that really made you decide to convert? That's such a huge move to make for somebody. So what was it about Judaism, the religion, Jewishness, the culture? I assume, I don't know. I'm not going to assume anything because I don't know what it was. What was it that made you connect with it?
I would probably say it was probably a Seder that I went to. When I was dating Douglas, I just felt that, this all just made so much sense to me. And it's funny because we just recently hosted Seder, and one of our Gentiles we actually invited over just loved the concept. It made so much sense to them. And they said exactly what I had thought so many years ago. And to me, the stories, the logic behind a lot of those stories just really pulled me in.
Amazing. Amazing. So, one of the things that I read was that Doug, really sort of building on what you've said, that he had struggled a lot as a kid, preparing for his bar mitzvah and doing all that, which, I think every kid probably does. And it's probably just much worse when you have a communication issue with the people who are supposed to be training you. And then he's gone around and done all this work to help kids with it. So your kids are probably too young to start thinking about that, but how do you think about them, or how are you? So let me just back up a minute. They've got a lot of cultures feeding into them as well. So how do you transmit all of that to the next generation? What is it that you want their experience to be as a Jewish kid, as a deaf kid, as a Black Mexican, everything, children of actor kid? What's the central value for you?
Well, there's several questions in that, so I'm going to try my best to answer all of them. Yeah, and they're all very good questions. So for me, I feel like the most important foundation of Judaism really is community. Without community, how and where will we find our Jewish roots, our Jewishness, so to speak? You have to have the community. So when Doug and I had our two boys, we both had shared that same values. We really wanted to have a family close by. We wanted family close by, and to raise our sons in the Jewish faith. And we wanted to make sure, then Hollywood came calling. And so it's not always something that I don't think so much about per se, because family is always with me. And my family was in New York. And then I just recently moved to Austin, almost about 2 years ago. And since then, I have felt that disconnect from our Jewish community in New York, because there's such a wonderful deaf Jewish community in New York. And it just made me push even harder to make sure that we are continuing that history, that culture, those customs, and passing those on to our boys. And Doug, really one of his main big regrets about his childhood is that he didn't really remember too much in regards to his bar mitzvah. So now our older son, who's 12, we are a little bit early, but we just finished his bar mitzvah studies. So we are very proud of Levi, our older son. And I feel like now in today's, in the political climate right now, you can't avoid conversations about what's happening globally. We just can't. So our boys are very intelligent and very curious and very mindful about what's happening out there. And I feel like this brings up, and it also just brings forward our Jewishness, here in Austin to the forefront. So that's what that intersectionality is to me. In this moment, what's really important and what is, critical, what is important right now is our Jewish identity here in Austin. And I think the beautiful thing about this is that we are finding people in the deaf community here in Texas who are also Jewish and connecting. So
Wow.
Douglas was hosting and trying to establish a bar mitzvah classes led by Rabbi Cantor, I believe is their name, but and just gathering them all together. And it is challenging to get that program off the ground, but he did it through the Jewish Deaf Congress, and collected a lot of those students from all over the U.S., whether it be in California, New York, Maryland, Texas, here in Texas. And from the fall until April, those children met weekly, every Sunday, to have their bar mitzvah classes. So it's been a wonderful experience. They did it all through Zoom, and that's, what we're so thankful for technology. The one positive thing that came out of COVID is that, now we have Zoom, right? So
Wow.
my sons are able then to, take those classes and have those conversations with their classmates. So
Incredible.
he just completed his studies. And so now he's going to continue that one-on-one study with a rabbi, with Darby Lay, Rabbi Darby Lay. So the next step then is trying to find a place, for December. That's when we're actually going to be, when he turns 13.
Wow. Amazing. And you're going to have the bar mitzvah in Austin?
Oh, yeah, that's the conversation that we're having, because we're supposed to have it in New York, with our family. But then, here we are in Austin. I don't know. That's, maybe, I don't know, maybe do it twice.
Oh, wow. Yeah, why not? People have 10 weddings. Why can't they have two bar mitzvahs?
Right? Exactly.
Yeah. So, okay, so I do have to ask you about Austin because so I am not a born and bred New Yorker. I grew up in Ohio, but I've lived here since I was 22, and it's sort of I found my people in New York, that. And honestly, you seem like such a New Yorker to me. You're very type A, I would say. Just you are hypercharged and willing, it seems to me, to try anything. And so, what made you leave? Why did you move to Austin? Which is, I know it's supposed to be very cool and everything, and I've even been there, but it just feels like a funny, it, I'm not saying incomprehensible, but it does seem like a funny move. What made you guys pick that place?
Well, ever since I started acting, I've had experiences of living in different places temporarily.
Mm,
With my family, they've come with, and we
mm,
lived in London while we shot The Eternals,
mm,
and I was able to enroll my boys in school there in London, which
mm,
was a wonderful experience for my boys. And I don't know if you're aware, but sign language in the UK is very different from American Sign Language. Here we use American Sign Language,
yes.
and the UK they use British Sign Language. So my boys, it was a crash course lesson in British Sign Language. They had a tutor that they worked with at home that was supporting their developing a British Sign Language, and they went to school there. It was such a positive experience. And then when we moved back to the States, we moved to Atlanta to continue on The Walking Dead. And I put my boys into a school in Atlanta. And I felt like those experiences of moving city to city gave me the courage and the strength to just to go for it, when the opportunity came knocking, and just to keep the family together, which was really important to me. But when I was in Atlanta, the TV show wrapped, and it was time to move back to New York. And my older son said, I'm done with moving around. I want to stay in the same school. I want to be able to have my friends with me. And he was getting to that age where friends, and his neighborhood and his community was really important. And I understood that, and I felt terrible about that. And in New York, at that moment, just wasn't the right fit. It was shortly after COVID, people were leaving the city. And then I ended up getting an opportunity to shoot a TV show in Austin.
Wow.
And it was a series that was greenlit for, a series that was greenlit for 3 seasons. And I was the lead of that show. And I thought, wow, we just looked at each other. Austin, wow, this is like a mecca for the deaf community. Washington, D.C. has Gallaudet University, which is the only deaf university in the world. And then Austin is, where a lot of people actually or deaf people tend to move and live, set up businesses. They have a thriving ecosystem in Austin. And the deaf school in Austin is one of the largest deaf schools in the United States. So Doug and I just looked at each other and were like, wait, this is the kind of place we can actually stay for a while for the boys. And we made that quick decision to move to Austin. And also, then again, after COVID, we just wanted to see some greenery, some green space. We wanted to have to have a bigger house. And that's what we got. And that's how I got here to Austin, Texas.
Amazing. Amazing. What is that TV series, the new one that you've been working on?
Well, that TV series, it didn't actually ever get a title, didn't get a name. It was shelved, actually, because it was one of the casualties that came from the writer's strike that we had this past fall, with the writer's strike and then the actor's strike. It got to be too much for the show, even though we completed shooting one season, the first season, but we had to shut down because of the strike, and then it was shelved. It was definitely devastating for me.
Oh my gosh, so that's terrible. That's really terrible because I want to see you in something new.
It is awful. It is awful. I'm not going to lie. I cried many tears. I cried so much when I actually got the news. But then again, after a while, I realized that I gained so much more than I lost, if that makes any sense. I found more than I lost, when that show was canceled. The people that I worked with were amazing. And I feel like a lot of people were introduced to the idea of working with, people that are marginalized, working with marginalized people, working with sign language as the primary culture on the set, and what an experience that was for everybody who was a part of the show. And I'm also thinking about the opportunities that, writers, actors, the crew, we, as deaf people, we've really gained so much because we had 3 deaf writers in the writer's room.
Wow.
And they wrote the show, parts of the show. And we had the first time we had, first time deaf actors. And it was a thrill to see them working in front of the camera. And I also had the experience of being the executive producer on the show, being one of the executive producers, along with Ava DuVernay and Joshua Jackson. So what a gift all of that was. So I think in the end, I just realized that I gained so much from that experience.
No, absolutely. I mean, look, it's such a tough business, the whole acting thing. I mean, and you had such a strangely fairy tale introduction to it. You didn't get to go through that, knocking on a million doors. So, but I'm sure something will come good, knock on wood, next for you, because you just seem like a natural. Just even here watching you sign is so beautiful and incredible. And I know I've read that you said you never were one of those kids that wanted to be an actress when you grew up. That wasn't really a thought for you. But clearly you did want to be an advocate, just even the way you made that decision when you were 13, that you weren't going to speak anymore. I mean, that's a pretty powerful, that's like a real, drawing a line in the sand, which is pretty amazing. But what I was wondering is, moving forward as an actor, what are the things that you're looking for? What are the kinds of roles you want to play? What are I mean, presumably now you have enough experience to know what you want and what you maybe don't want.
You are right. Growing up, my dream was not to be an actor. My dream was to be a writer. And, I majored in creative writing in college. And I wrote poetry, I wrote, novellas. And now I feel like, I've basically woken up from a dream, and I truly understand that in this world and in this industry specifically, for actors like myself, in order to continue working, to continue telling stories that I want to tell, I have to create them.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm understanding now, to take control, not to sit back politely and wait and hope that somebody is going to create a story for me. So that is what I'm doing right now. I am going through different books, different TV programs, different movies for ideas and inspiration. And I've been meeting with other writers, trying to develop projects together. And I'm also very excited to say that currently I am writing a children's book.
Oh,
I don't know if I was supposed to say it, but I said it. I'm writing a children's book, so I'm doing that.
oh, that's
Yeah. And
wonderful.
so
Are you
written,
is it an illustrated book, or is it?
yes, it will be illustrated. Yes, it will be. Once I finish my manuscript, and then we were going to find an illustrator to jump on board. So it's very exciting. I'm working with, a lovely, book editor right now who's guiding me through this whole process. So, and my understanding is you've already written children's books before. What is that process like for you? Any tips you have for me?
Oh, you're switching the interview around. I like that. I think it's incredible. I mean, I've written a lot of books for grown-ups
Yeah,
and a lot of books
flipping the
for
table
kids.
around on you. Sorry about that.
Yes, I know that's sneaky. But um, but I think the thing for me about writing children's books, which is so great, is when you go out to talk about the books. When you talk to grown-ups, it's like whatever. They just sit there and, the children, they will respond to you and they will ask you questions and they really engage with the books like they're real. For them, there's not that separation. And I just think that's great. Can I ask you what it's about? The book?
Yeah, the book is it's loosely based on my two boys and their experience living in Brooklyn. Because we have a brownstone in Brooklyn. So it's just loosely based on. So I think that's all I can really say. Well, I will tell you, yes, I agree with you completely about children. That is one of the main reasons why I chose to teach as my profession in the past, starting 20 years ago. And I think, my favorite part of the day at work or at the school was, sign time. I loved reading books to my kids, to my students, to sign the stories, to act them out. And my students were very diverse. It's a pretty wild class. I loved my class. It was a mixture of deaf children, but it was mostly hearing children of deaf adults, as we call them, codas, children of deaf adults. So they usually, and in my class, their first language, even though they were hearing, but was sign language. So,
Wow.
they were bilingual kids. And also there were local neighborhood kids, whose parents just wanted them to learn another language. And, and it was kindergarten and first grade, their brains just absorbed everything. Those students, especially those local kids who didn't know sign language, learned so fast, but they were able to receive direct instruction from me. Because I taught all subjects to the kindergarten and first graders. just at a regular public school using sign language. So it was amazing. And they were just the most honest audience I've ever had. You know, Broadway movies, they're nothing compared to those students. they're tough critics. And
Yes.
I felt really, it just showed me what kind of stories work.
Yeah.
And then I also, realized what they're really connected to. And what I realized it was authenticity.
Yeah, no, I think that's 100% right. And I did want to ask you, as a kid, were you a big reader? Did you watch movies? What was what was the thing that really fed your imagination the most?
Absolutely. When I was a little kid, I was an introvert. I was very introverted. I still am. It's no different, but I'm not sure if it was just my personality or it was because I was deaf and, I didn't really have deaf friends when I was a kid. In elementary school specifically, it was just my parents to communicate and close family members who could communicate directly with me. So my best friend, honestly, it's very cliche, but they were books. I immersed myself into books. I traveled through books. I felt like I could communicate through books. And that was my saving grace. My parents knew that also. And I remember, as a present, they would, give me this beautiful, well-decorated bookshelf with built-in glass case for my favorite books. And that's how important it was to me. And then when it came to movies, yes, I was exposed to a lot of foreign films mostly growing up in the early years because a lot of those movies when I was younger were not captioned here in America. So my father worked at the University of Illinois in Chicago, and he would stop by the library and take out foreign films to bring them home so I could watch them because they were already subtitled since they were foreign films. So that was my exposure to films. So I watched a lot of movies that weren't really universal. I mean, I wasn't exposed to like Disney films really until later in life.
That's probably better.
Maybe.
Yeah, now it must be incredible for you to see your sons because they must have such a different experience now with everything being able to be captioned on TV and stuff for better and for worse, I guess. Um, Pretty
Yeah, and my
incredible.
boys are they always, sick of me telling them, back in the day when I was a kid, we didn't have all of these things. So like roll their eyes.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, and I have to say, it's wonderful to see my boys growing up in a world where they are deaf superheroes in their own right. It's not just one and not just their mother. And they don't think it's that cool. They're not that impressed, to be honest, that I'm a superhero. They are proud that, that their mom is on the screen, but I'm just so happy that I'm not the only one now that they see. They see more than just the one superhero. They see people from Echo. They see, characters from Hawkeye. So there's a lot more deaf representation that's out on the screen now.
Yeah.
And I'm just so happy to see that my boys are growing up with that mindset that they are not lacking in anything at all. In fact, my younger son, when he was younger, he said to me one day, he's like, I'm really sad, Mom. And I asked him why. He's like, I'm just so sad that hearing people don't know how to sign. Poor them. They don't know how cool it is.
Yeah, that's amazing. Oh my God, you sound like you have an incredible family. When I said you were a superhero at the beginning, I was just talking about your Marvel roles, but honestly, I think it's all the rest of this that's really incredible. I mean, I, I have to thank you because this has been such a terrible few months of the world being so crazy that it's just such a pleasure to have this conversation with you. I really appreciate it. And I will have you back on when your children's book is finished and we will talk about it. How's that? With the pictures.
Yes, yes. Yes,
Okay,
definitely.
thank you
It's a
both so
deal.
much. Ramon, thank you so much for your help making this happen. And Lauren, it's been truly, truly a pleasure. Um, good luck with everything, all your many, many projects. It's really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, Julie. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.